gorgeous, gorgeous spring day. The weather was perfect. The sun was shining. I had caught up with a really good friend that I hadn't got to talk to in a while, and got home, and there were some flowers left at my door. Riley had gone out with a friend and showed up with like my favorite Starbucks drink. Like, it was just a great day. And Riley had a volleyball game that evening, and I had actually left my phone in in the car during the volleyball game. And so when I got out to my car, I had multiple missed calls and some texts from a really good friend of mine, April. She said, "Where are you right now?" And I said, "Well, I'm still sitting in the parking lot at the rec center." And she said, "Okay, I'm coming to you. I need to talk to you." And at that time, I heard a male's voice in the background, and I immediately said, "April, what's wrong?" I knew at that point something was wrong. And she said, "Just sit where you are. I'll be right there." So when April arrived, the police were with her. And I knew something had happened. I had just been with Riley. I had just been with their dad. I knew it was Nick. It really becomes a blur at that point. But the police were there, and I do remember them saying that he had passed away. And it was an apparent overdose of something. They didn't tell me any facts at that point. And I just remember just screaming, and I lost any control of anything that I had, because that was my baby. I needed to see him. I needed to hold him. I needed it to not be real, is what I really needed. And when they would not let me, and they told me that he had already been sent to Roanoke for autopsy, I knew fentanyl was involved. I knew right there in my gut, because I was his mom, and they wouldn't have withheld him from me if it was safe for me to have seen him and to have touched him and held him. It was 6 days from the time that Nick passed away, 6 long, excruciating days, until I was able to see him. And that, to me, is one of the cruelest things that you can do to a parent. You know, it still was not real to me until I saw him. It took a course of a couple of days to kind of start putting together what had taken place, or what everyone felt like had taken place. I did not know that Nick was using any kind of substance other than I knew he was probably smoking a little weed, because I could smell that every once in a while. What it looked like is that Nick had purchased what he believed to be Xanax. He had become addicted to Xanax and Percocet. But it looks like Nick went to Roanoke, drove to Roanoke, which he would have never done. That shows when you're trying to get your substance of choice, the things that you'll do. And it's believed that he purchased Xanax from a dealer based on where he got money out of the ATM and where he was. And I believe he purchased Xanax that was pressed to look like Xanax, and he had no reason to believe it was anything different, because when the toxicology came back, it was 100% fentanyl. The only other substance that showed up in his toxicology from the autopsy was weed. That was it. 100%. 100%. Nick was a big guy, like 6'2", just broad, big, but he had the kindest heart and the kindest soul, and he was the funniest kid ever. Just very quick-witted, scary smart at times. And his mama's protector. Like, you know, he just always was all about his mom and that he was going to take care of me. You know, I didn't have any worries, anything like that. So just all around a really good human. Just 6 weeks or so before Nick passed away, he saved the life of one of his friends by using Narcan. You know, his friend was in active overdose, and Nick recognized and administered Narcan and saved his life. That speaks to who Nick was. His story happens to thousands of people every day, and I feel like we have to talk about it. Nick suffered from an anxiety disorder, and that was from the time he was probably like 5 or 6 years old. And then as he got older, his anxiety just continued to get worse to the point like it would prevent him at times from participating in things that he might have wanted to do. And then as Nick got older, I saw some depression set in. There was always some underlying anger that he dealt with, but I saw that become more depression. I battled with Nick for years about medications. I battled with him for years about counseling. From the time he was in middle school is when I recognized that it was really enough that I felt like he could benefit from counseling. At one point, Nick talked to me about his desire, I guess he was probably 10th, 11th grade, about the thought of smoking weed. For his anxiety. And we talked about that. I talked very openly with him about that. He knows where I grew up. He knows the time I grew up, and he would say, Mom, I know that you probably did that. And I was honest in that, I had in my life. But the difference, I was very clear with him, the difference of what I had access to growing up was raised on somebody's uncle's farm 3 miles down the road versus just not knowing what could potentially be in anything he would have access to. And I also was very clear and reminded him it was an illegal substance at that time. And before he turned to something illegal, there's all kinds of great medications. Maybe we needed to try something like that. I also struggle and have struggled throughout my life with anxiety and depression. And so I knew the things he was dealing with. I have taken medications. I do take medication now. And, I really advocated for that. But he was so resistant and so hesitant. He didn't want to do anything that made him different or made him have a problem or a diagnosis. I don't want Nick's death to be classified as an overdose. I want his death to be classified as fentanyl poisoning because that's what it was. Overdose to me indicates, whether intentionally or not, you took enough of something to cause your death. Nick didn't. He did not know there was fentanyl in what he was taking. So I'm very adamant that I want that overdose label dropped from his story. He was poisoned. I'm on this Facebook group called I Miss My Son, and I'm sickened every day by the people that report in there that that's how they lost their son, was fentanyl poisoning. I mean, it far exceeds anything else of how people have lost their children. And it's that 18 to 25-year-old population it's robbing us. I was very much into the education of things. And I feel like at this point in time, now that this has happened to Nick, I would parent very differently. I am parenting Riley differently. And I am much more geared towards the harm reduction side of things. You can't scare kids out of trying things. I mean, I was a teenager. I know the things I did, but it was a different time. And that's what I would tell Nick, and that's what I tell Riley now. We've poured millions of dollars into the education side of things, and we still are losing our young adults at an alarming rate. We have things that can save their life, and then you worry about treating the addiction. You can't treat the addiction if they're dead and gone. I believe if Nick would have had fentanyl test strips, that could have saved his life. I believe he was using alone, so I don't know that Narcan would have been beneficial to him at that time. But I know Nick saved someone with Narcan. It needs to be everywhere. It's not going to hurt you if you're not in an opioid overdose. I believe that Nick could potentially still be here if he had the capability of calling a hotline and telling somebody he was using alone. You know, it's just somebody that sits on the phone and they're trained to hear a change in your breathing. And then if you don't respond, they get 911 there immediately. We're not saying, here's some test strips and some Narcan, go have at it. We're saying, I don't want you to do this, but if you're going to, I want you to be safe and I want you to come home to me alive. I just can't imagine a parent saying out loud or thinking, oh, my kid would never do that. Yes, your kid would do that. Yes, your kid has a friend that's going to offer them something. You've got to talk to your kids. And again, parents now have to equip their kids with the tools and resources to save their life. We are so quick to judge. Why are we so quick to judge families? You know, I felt judged when I separated from their dad. I definitely felt judged when my child died. We just, as a community, have to take care of each other. We have to keep talking about it. We have to talk about it. Us that have mental health issues, we have to not be afraid to tell anybody. You know, I'll tell anybody. Riley is struggling right now because of the time of year. She shared it with her whole lacrosse team. And I have worked with her. It's not anything to be embarrassed about. You're not embarrassed if you have diabetes. You're not embarrassed if you have other things that require you to take a medication on a daily basis. Why are we so embarrassed if we have to take medication for our mental health every day? In raising my daughter, who also struggles with anxiety, no holds barred with her. You know, she's in counseling, she's on medication, and we have to teach our kids that it's okay to see a counselor. You know, I grew up in a time we didn't talk about our stuff outside of the home. We didn't want labels on our kids because that made them different somehow. I want my child to have every label that she needs to have to make sure that she is set up for success. I love that at 15, she didn't think twice about disclosing to her entire lacrosse team what is wrong with her. And I told her by doing that, she doesn't know who sat there and thought, is this what I'm dealing with? Could I need some help? Should I talk to my parents? What I would tell any parent right now, you need to arm your kids. I just think that we as parents, it's time for us to say to our kids, to stop saying, don't do it. It's time for us to say, I was a kid once, I was a teenager, I was a young adult, I made some stupid decisions. but give them the tools and the resources that when they do make those decisions to try things, because they're going to, that they have resources to keep them alive. You are in survival the first year, and then year number 2 rolls around, and it's all about you're hit with the reality that he is gone forever. I'm never going to see him again. I'm never going to hear him again. I'm fearful of forgetting what he sounded like, or forgetting what he looked like, or, I promise you, there's just not a second that passes that it's not there, this overwhelming sadness. And, I say, while I will have joy, I will have moments of joy in my life again, but I will never have joyful life again. When you've lost your child, I'll never know what kind of full adult person he would have been. I'll never know what kind of dad he would have been. Riley says that's who she intended to walk her down the aisle. She already says, who's going to do that for me? As hard as my own grief has been, and as hard as I've tried to work through my own, the hardest part of all of it is watching the little sister grieve her big brother. They were just getting at that place of being friends, of talking about things. And, I'm sad to think that there's going to come a time that I'm not here and her dad's not here and her brother should be and he won't be. And it's times like that she'll bring up. She's playing lacrosse this year for the first time. It's totally out of her comfort zone, but that was Nick's sport. He played it from the time he was in 5th grade. And so she decided she wanted to play, and it's worked out beautiful. He always played in the number 23, and she was able to get that number. The first game that she had ridden the bus, of course, to Blacksburg, and when she got back and I picked her up, she just got into the car and she fell apart. And she said, Mama, he was supposed to be here. He should have been here for those things. It has forced her to be in touch with her own mental health and how she's feeling. And honestly, overall, she's in a really good place. I'm very proud of her. And I tell her all the time, her resiliency at 15 years old is amazing to me. I'm just amazed by her. She's bound and determined that Nick has a lasting legacy as well. I was a good mom to Nick. I am a good mom. Just because this happened does not define his life, does not define my life, does not define Riley. And I will spend the rest of my life telling his story. Nick and I talked a lot in the night. It was nothing for him to come down 1 o'clock in the morning. And, I would lay there. I could hear him come down the stairs, and I would lay there, and I would just be really quiet and be like, oh, I'm so tired. Please don't. And he'd open the door, and I'd get a little, Mom. And I'd lay there, and he'd go to shut the door, and I could never let him walk away. I'd be like, come on, buddy. And he'd either come and just kind of kneel down and sit beside of my bed, or he'd crawl in the bed with me. And sometimes we would lay there and talk till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I miss that. I probably miss that the most of anything. And I find myself awake lots of times at 1 or 2 o'clock just listening. And it never comes. My brain tells me I did everything, but my heart is constantly questioning. I'm his mom. There had to be something I missed or could have done differently. They say hindsight's 20/20. I want people to use my hindsight of the things that I can say I know I did wrong and should have pushed harder. I will wonder every single day if medication could have made a difference, if counseling could have made a difference. We've got to take responsibility that there are things we can do. There is money we can spend to equip our children and our young adults to not put themselves in situations that's going to lead to their death. If I can save one person by Nick's story, then that's what I want to do. It's how I keep Nick alive. I don't want him to just be forgotten. I owe it to him. There were so many more things about him that were amazing, and I don't want him to just be a statistic. He didn't deserve that. He doesn't deserve that, and I will tell Nick's story for the rest of my life as long as I'm able. And I think Riley will too.